Rodessa, was once known as Frog Level. When locals met to come up with a name for their community, in the 1880s, the local frog population was croaking from a nearby creek bottom louder than the townsfolk could talk. So, they decided, what the heck, let's call it Frog Level. The name held for over a decade until 1898, when the Kansas City Southern Railroad steamed through the area. Story has it that the president of the railroad renamed the town after his daughter Rosie. Locals went along with the name change even though the train stopped in Rodessa only when one of them waved it down. After the first trains tooted through the area that year, new homes and businesses began to crop up along Front Street on both sides of the tracks. Rodessa was rapidly outgrowing surrounding communities. A post office was moved into the Tisdale store on Front Street. Mr. J. Thomas constructed the first commercial buildings in Rodessa in 1900. Thomas was an area merchant and a cotton gin operator. He also ran the local merchandise store. Rodessa by then had several other businesses including Walgreens Drug Store, the Columbia Hotel, the Columbia Cafe, and a large cotton gin. With the establishment of several stores, the post office and other business in Rodessa, residents of the neighboring town Spoonful soon dispersed, many of them opting to live in Rodessa. Rodessa's second school was built in 1899 and was used for 40 years. But, because of low enrollment in the high school, students in those grades were bused to Vivian from 1920 until 1939. But Rodessa wouldn't have enrollment problems for long. By 1935, Rodessa's population stood at nearly 200. Many of these folks belonged to cotton worker families living in quiet timber clearings within a 1-mile radius of town. This pastoral setting was soon to change following the oil boom that began in that same year. With the discovery of oil near Rodessa, population levels launched, changing the character of the town for quite some time. It all started in 1930, when oil geologist Daniel L. Perkins convinced R.W. Norton to drill an oil well just outside of town. Norton agreed but was sweating beads and nearly bankrupt with nothing to show after nearly a mile of drilling. Finally, at 5,506 feet, Norton purged a monstrous gas well, from which gushed 11 million cubic feet of gas per day. Now more trusting of Perkins's theories, Norton was easily talked into drilling again, this time on the young farm just outside of town. The results were even more staggering. The young well flowed at 30,000 barrels a day, a mother lode that drew significant attention to Rodessa. Soon oil barons from all over the company were showing up with their drills. By May of 1936, Rodessa was king of the oil field communities in the area. The prosperous Rodessa oil field soon had attracted nearly 5,000 people. Crews worked hard on the 182 wells that hammered oil out of the Rodessa grounds night and day. Like the first young well, most of the wells were drilled more than a mile deep. Many of the businessmen involved in the Rodessa oil boom profited greatly off the wells. It was reported that 2 lucky men who started into the business on a measly $400 loan wound up profiting $400,000 thanks to the swollen Rodessa oil field. Rodessa's population jumped to 8,000 between 1935 and 1940. The bustling town sported several stores, 2 big picture shows, several hotels, garages, filling stations, scores of warehouses, and refineries, along with houses, tents and shacks to house the oil workers. Flares burning excess gas emitted by the wells lit the night and could be seen 40 miles away. The Rodessa oil field was nearly 20 miles long, and 2.5 miles wide. 2 new wells were drilled nearly every day. Rodessa was described as the busiest, noisiest place on the Kansas City Southern Railway. Rodessa real estate jumped considerably during the oil boom. By 1940, some city lots sold for as much as $30,000, and rent was then already as high as $400 a month. But this was small potatoes for many of the thriving residents of Rodessa who were doing well in the oil industry. During its peak, the Rodessa oil field was one of the biggest producers in the nation. But soon it was apparent that the Rodessa reserves were not bottomless. In 1940, though still producing heaps of oil, the Rodessa oil field began to taper off. By 1946, 308 wells vied for Rodessa oil. Rodessa's population swelled to nearly 10,000 before oil production began to decline. Slowly, oil company owners began to close up shop, and Rodessa's population began to disperse. By 1949, Rodessa's population had plummeted to 3,700, but there were still a few residents around to enjoy the town's incorporation in 1967. A continued decline sunk the population back down to just 400 by 1970, returning what had become a flashy boomtown to its calmer origins. The 321 Rodessa residents of today commemorate their town's past each October by celebrating Boomtown Day. As many as 3,000 visitors attend the festival, which features arts and crafts, an old-time fiddler contest and street dancers.